So unlike the two of y'all, apparently, unbeknownst to me, I have no personal connection to Herschel Gordon Lewis. I'm just the guy here to talk about a movie and possibly say I don't like it. But I'm also not entirely convinced that the point of this movie is to like it as much as just to absorb it and experience it and kind of sit in its bloody mess that it makes all over itself and all over the screen. But on this episode of the Culture Cast, I am still your host, Chris Dashew, much to the chagrin of many, and I'm joined by two people who, one hasn't been on the show in a year, and the other has never been on this show. I'm talking about author of several things, including an upcoming book about The Room, I believe. Yes, is that correct?
Yes, it's out now.
Okay, is it out now? Okay.
It's out now.
Okay. And do you want to tell me the title again so I don't fucking mess it up when I...
Accidental Genius, An Oral History of The Room. And what's great, I didn't know there were multiple books already fucking called Accidental Genius, so now we just put one more on the stack.
Author of Accidental Genius. He has been on a couple episodes of my show. We did a George Lucas, Steven Spielberg script read-through on the projection booth many moons
Marathon,
ago.
yeah. And it took many moons to do.
Yeah, geez, didn't it? Andrew J. Roush.
All of that, that's right.
And from flickattack.com, he runs the place, Rod Lott. Well, I guess, yeah, technically it's been a year for both of you, and we're here talking about the second splatter movie of the month, though it was supposed to be the first one. Supposed to be the first one for obvious reasons, but now we're talking about it second. We're talking about 1963's Blood Feast.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to witness some scenes from the next attraction to play this theater. This picture, truly one of the most unusual ever filmed, contains scenes which, under no circumstances, should be viewed by anyone with a heart condition or anyone who is easily upset. We urgently recommend that if you are such a person or the parent of a young or impressionable child now in attendance, that you and the child leave the auditorium for the next 90 seconds.
So the film is directed by Herschel Gordon Lewis with a screenplay by Alison Louise Down, and it stars Mal Arnold, William Kerwin, Connie Mason, Lynn Bolton, and Scott H. Hall. No, not that Scott Hall, all you wrestling fans out there. And the film's all about Mal Arnold, who plays a guy who wants to create I was almost at an Italian feast. Boy, that'd be great. An Egyptian feast. Fuad Ramsey wants to make an Egyptian feast, and what does that entail? A lot of blood, a lot of guts, and ripping out a woman's tongue right out of her mouth. Like I alluded to in the beginning, I have no personal connection to this film, but each of these gentlemen does. So starting with Rod, give me a little bit of the history behind your time with Blood Feast.
I have to say right up front, I was raised in a pretty strict household where viewing was limited, audio, what we could listen to was limited. So I remember the big boxes of Herschel Gordon Lewis stuff on video shelves, but it wasn't until I never saw a frame of it until I rented Filmhouse Fever in high school, which was a compilation film that Steve Buscemi is one of the two guys in, and they use a lot of Lewis's stuff in that, include like Blood Feast and 2000 Maniacs, I believe, are the biggest films featured in that. So I remember that was my first true exposure to his movies. And part of me was like, I should not be watching this. This is like, it was so odd and so unlike anything I'd ever seen, that part of me was just like, I should not be watching this. I'm so glad my parents aren't here. This felt like just complete alien being from another planet stuff to me. And I didn't see it in full, honestly, until Something Weird Video re-released it on Blu-ray several years ago. And that was the first time I actually saw it. And I, for all its faults, I really do like it.
What about you, Andy?
Well, I can't say that I was ever really a big fan of it or any of the Herschel Gordon Lewis stuff, but I got this idea. I had interviewed Herschel for a book I did where I interviewed 50 filmmakers, and I thought he was neat and he was, easy to get a hold of. And I had this idea, what if I got a hold of Herschel and tried to do a book with him about his movies? And so that's how I met him. We did a book together on all of his films, and I actually had to watch some of them, so I have to say I don't care for most of them, and I feel bad about that. The only one I really like is 2000 Maniacs, which is the second in his Blood trilogy. But I don't think that Herschel was a real big fan really of his movies either. Like he only saw most of them as a way to make money. And, I'm sure there was some craftsmanship that he cared about, but mostly he was very much a money-focused, money-oriented guy in everything. So
yeah, I guess I didn't know what I was getting myself into with this. I knew obviously how important this is to the splatter film genre or subgenre, microgenre, whatever you want to call it. But obviously, I mean, this is considered the first. So if you want to do a month on splatter films, why not do the quote first one? Unquote. So that was the drive behind watching this movie. I think to your point, Andy, I can see why this movie exists the way that it does, especially at the time that it comes out. I mean, this is 63. Some of this, a lot of this, there's a lot of this movie that's very little, if anything, going on. It's scenes from another movie that is not what this one is trying to be. There are some weird scenes that just are kind of there, but have to be there to maintain semblance of a plot. But the stuff that this movie is known for is not at all what you would be seeing in 63 at all. Right. At all. And that's the thing that, again, you have to watch this movie and remember that. And that's part of what made this a little difficult initially the first time I watched it, is I had to put myself in the mindset of someone in 63. Because at this point, and I think y'all would both agree, this movie's beyond fucking quaint compared to the shit that you can see on... If we were to just stop this recording and go to Shudder right now, we could watch something 10 times more intense than that is easily accessible to everybody, essentially anyone with a
more realistic looking,
yeah.
But
yeah, and to your point, as unrealistic as this looks, it looks pretty good for the time. It looks really good for the time, and that's what I think for me gives this movie a little bit of an edge over something else. Is that it has such a, in terms of the gore and the way that it's used, it has such a foot in the modern way of using it, that those scenes don't feel at odds with the other stuff in the movie, which is the acting and the actors. The direction's fine. It's not, I mean, again, it's not that it's not anything special, but it didn't have to be. He knows what he's doing and he's reveling in the gore, which is fine. But yeah, I don't think it's a movie that is asking to be enjoyed in any stretch of the imagination. But
it was to shock. I think it was very much to shock audiences. And, he knew he could, for a $24,000 budget, which was shot on film and, with single takes for most of the things, not great acting, but he knew he could get people to talk about it. You could get word of mouth. Oh my God, I saw this shocking movie. And I do think it's not without its charms. It's just not my favorite. But
if I remember correctly, the reason that he and David F. Friedman, the producer, did it is because the money was starting to, or the returns on their nudie cuties were starting to run out.
Right.
And it was just diminishing returns. So like, what else can we do? And this turned out to be it. And I think I'm sure that Andy's at least familiar with the quote that Herschel Gordon Lewis said about this movie a lot, which was, it's like a Walt Whitman movie or a Walt Whitman poem. It's no good, but it's the first of its type. And that really is like, to me, that's half the fun of watching it, is seeing that this is really where this whole thing started. I don't think it, outside of, in the mainstream, it doesn't get the credit for that it really deserves. Most people don't even know about it. But if you've read Joe Bob Briggs' book, Profoundly Disturbing, he devotes a chapter to this and puts it in a really good historical perspective about why they did it and how it was received. And man, I'd give anything to be part of that initial audience to see this, because I just can't imagine what it was like to see gore like that up on the screen and in such a rough way. Just the filmmaking technique it's so without technique and so cheap looking, but not in an off-putting way to me. I just can't imagine what those people would be thinking. Like, what did I get myself into? Or, you probably had part of the audience reveling in it and part of them just walking out. There probably wasn't much of an in-between, I wouldn't think.
So Herschel said that they opened this at this drive-in in Peoria, and they thought if it bombs in Peoria, nobody's going to know, yada, yada. And they weren't going to go and they weren't going to watch it. But they ended up, him and Dave, there's different versions of the same story. But they ended up going. They decided to go and see. I think they go on the second night. They go on Saturday to see, how the movie plays. And there's a line down the road. They think there's been an accident. But as he said, we were the accident, So all of these people are packed into this drive-in to go see Blood Feast. But the part I was going to get at here was that he said that up until the tongue scene, people are yelling out, this movie sucks, it's a bad movie, and people are laughing. And then when it gets to the tongue scene, everything stops. Because again, this was something they'd never seen before. And I think, it is revolutionary, even if it's bad, even if it's very cheaply done, it's rudimentary, I guess, is the word I'm looking for, which I'm more fascinated by the making of these kind of movies. That's what always draws me into these low budget movies, the stories behind them. But I just think that's it. And also when they go to the drive-in, they try to get in for free because, of course, they're probably both cheap. I don't know Friedman. I never knew Friedman, but Herschel was notoriously cheap and he had a lot of money. He had a book on advertising that got, reprinted like 30 times or something. So he had money. And yet they tried to get in for free. And they told him, I'm the producer and I'm the director. And the people in Peoria just looked at him like, bullshit. Like nobody would believe them. So they had to pay for their tickets in disgust, I guess. And they go in and they watch it. But I just wanted to throw that in there. I just thought that was kind of funny.
That story I've heard many times. I wonder if it's apocryphal. I don't care if it is. I still like it.
It's hilarious.
What you just said about the audience reacting, like laughing until the tongue scene reminded me of when The Exorcist got re-released for the version you've never seen. And
right.
I remember going to that, and I'm in my 50s. I've seen The Exorcist several times, but I was with a Friday night audience of a bunch of teenagers, and they were making fun of it and everything until the first possession, where you actually see the Reagan as the devil, and they shut the hell up. And from then on, they were loving the movie. But it's like an hour to an hour and a half to get to that point. And it's probably like that. I mean, that's what you remind me of. It's
right, right.
People had no idea what was in store for them. And you're right that, I've seen it 3 times now. And most recently, just this last week, and I was watching it at home. The only person at home was my youngest son. And the only time I was worried about him walking in was when that tongue scene started. And I was like, oh man, this is even rougher than I remembered. I just, please don't walk out here right now. He didn't. So, don't turn me into DHS or anything.
It's so prolonged too. It's not immediate. It cuts away and cuts back 2 or 3 times before you even see what happens. And also on top of everything else, for what it is and for how infamous I feel like it is for this movie, I would say that you essentially don't see anything. You see him stick his fingers in her mouth, and then you see his fingers in her mouth, and you see his fingers in her mouth, and then you see him pulling the lamb's tongue or the sheep's tongue in from out of frame. But that's it. You don't see it.
And supposedly the only reason Astrid Olsen got the role was because she was the only one that her mouth was big enough to hold 2 tongues, is the thing, which I don't even want to know how they did the casting couch thing for that or whatever, because Dave Friedman brought her in the same as he brought in Connie Mason, the Playboy Playmate. But so there's that, but then also they get the tongue, and this again could be apocryphal, but it is a good story. So supposedly they had the tongue for several days while they were shooting, and the refrigerator breaks down or malfunctions, and so the tongue stinks and it's nasty, and they still shoot it and still stick it in her tongue or in her mouth, and which is really disgusting. But you'd think she'd be reacting more in the, out of revulsion. It would be hard to just lay there silently and be dead after you get that nasty thing in your mouth. But
I mean, I guess if the option is I'm going to have it put back in my mouth for another take, I think I sit there and I don't move.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
And not for nothing, they give out vomit bags. It's like a William Castle type promo.
Right. And supposedly they were the first ones to give out barf bags. I have no idea if that's true, but probably.
And what's funny about, that the idea of revulsion to the point of vomiting, which Rod, you mentioned The Exorcist, they talked about that in The Exorcist, all people were puking in the aisles. All that does is just generate good publicity for a really, again, for a movie that I think the three of us would agree is fine for what it is. But what it needs to be is that scene. It just needs to build up to that scene. Because even the climax of the movie is as anticlimactic as possible, given what happens about 23 minutes into depending on which cut you've seen, either 58 minutes or an hour and 7 minutes. So there's about 10 minutes difference. But for a movie about splatter and gore, the one scene, the scenes with the gore are very quick. They're not as prolonged as you would think. For a movie about blood and gore, 58 minutes, it's probably 7 minutes of gore in a 58-minute movie, if that. It's not as prolonged as you would think now, given, in Terrifier, a woman is split in half over the span of 10 minutes.
But, it's hard for us, even though we all know about film here, it's hard for us, I think, now to really fully understand that context of watching movies before 1963 when, you'd had these things where Western movies, people get shot point blank and there's no blood and they just fall over. And so, when you put, and apparently there were other movies in Italy, I've seen it claimed, I don't know, that had blood before that. But at least here it was, the first of its kind. But I think that we have to look at that context of how shocking that would have been if you'd never even seen blood in a movie.
Right.
True. And like Psycho, you don't see the knife go in, but you think you see the knife go in just because of the editing. It's kind of the same way with the tongue and everything, how he cuts, but not as skillfully, obviously. But
doesn't have to be.
It delivers on the gore. It does. It gives what it promises, which not all of David F. Freeman's movies do, or Herschel Gordon Lewis for that matter. And he definitely got gorier as young. You see something I'm blanking, but
the Gorgora Girls or something.
Yeah, and then the chocolate milk coming out of the it's silly as can be, but he got gorier even in his old age. He knew how to pour it on.
Right. He knew what was going to get a reaction, and
Well, and you mentioned William Castle already. That's what this strikes me as. In a lot of ways, it's what if William Castle just embraced gore over some of the other kind of tricks, right? Because as far as I'm concerned, the way this movie uses gore is in a very provocative way, in a way that, again, William Castle would put, things underneath people's seats to vibrate. It's
right. The tingler.
Yeah, it's provocative. You're being a provocateur intentionally. Castle did it in a way that was advertisement based. And this one did as well, sort of. But again, when people are word of mouth saying that, hey, there's this movie where this woman gets her fucking tongue ripped out. Yeah, there's, John Wayne and everybody else is not doing that at the time.
Right.
Yeah, and, there's none of that. And that is, again, that's the hard thing to put this in context. And I feel like, I watched this on Tubi one of the times, which is fucking crazy. It's free on Tubi. A movie that is or was, I'm assuming it's not banned anymore in the UK, I think as of post 2005, but it was banned in the UK as one of the video nasties for the longest time. And now it's just on Tubi.
One of the things, we talk about the advertising and stuff. And I love the thing that Dave Friedman did, because he was a master showman, So Friedman filed for an injunction for his own movie to get an injunction so it couldn't play in Sarasota. And then they get it. And then they advertise, they advertise it based on this, and they get all this news coverage and, all this stuff. It's the movie that, I don't think they said it in those words, the movie they didn't want you to see, but, all of a sudden it's that movie, and I guess if it's true, even that first drive-in in Ohio, there's people picketing out there. Now, I don't know if they're picketing on the highway. I don't know. That could have been made up too. Who knows? But
the movie Snuff, that too, that the guy who produced Snuff, which is not in the same league, but he used those same tactics of, boycotting his own movie, hiring people to picket, hiring people to call radio stations and complain or whatever. But it is I guess the William Castle thing is kind of a good comparison if he didn't hire Robert Bloch to write screenplay, because
right.
screenplay, supposedly that the down credit you gave is Herschel, using a pseudonym because he thought women or people would they'd be kinder if a woman wrote it, or they thought a woman wrote it or something. But yeah, I mean, it
passes the Bechdel test, obviously.
Right. Obviously, this is going to do it.
So hard. You know what's funny? I saw that name in the credits before I even knew it wasn't a real person, and I was like,
and you're like, that's a pseudonym for something made up. Yeah,
that's the fakest fucking name I've ever heard, because it feels like a name that all you got to do is rearrange the letters and it's Herschel Gordon Lewis, because I'm pretty sure it is. I'm pretty sure it's just those letters rearranged. It has to be, because there's.
And I love that. Yeah, there was no real script. There was an outline, and then they kind of put together a script with the cast, but it was only like 14 pages, which tells you why there's this shit. And my guess is, and I don't know this to be true, but my guess is some of that footage of the police stuff, which is what you're talking about, it's like a whole other movie, was put in there to extend the length. I have no idea if that's true, but they do feel like two completely different movies. And the funny part about those scenes is that the cop figures out the whole thing from his office. Like he breaks the case in a chair in his office, like that. In the whole movie, he's sitting there and I figured it out, and he's a hell of a detective.
Yeah, they should have had him on the Zodiac case. Just sits there and stares at the cipher.
He could have done it from wherever he was at. He didn't even have to leave town.
I got it. I just stared at the cipher and I got it. It's fucking bizarre to me. Yeah, the entire conceit of where this movie goes in the second act is just, It's the biggest yada yada-ing I've ever seen in a movie. It's just like, Etar, Ishtar, that's what it was. We got it, everybody. It's like, wait the fucking stop movie. You don't get away with this one. But at the same time, you've got people having their body parts ripped out. So the movie's not, it's, sleight of handing everybody. Like, look over here, please. Don't look at the shitty script. Look at the girl having her tongue ripped out of her mouth.
I think the fact that there is no script goes to the idea that probably he just knew what people were going to want to see was this gore, and they didn't even bother to write a script. Let's just throw some shit together, and then we'll punctuate it every 15 minutes with some kind of half-assed gore, and then we put the tongue scene kind of in the middle, and everybody walks out and they don't know what the hell they've just seen, but they're going to talk about it.
A little peekaboo nudity, not ton, but
little, yeah.
Nothing you can see and feel like you got your money's worth. And a lot of static shots of like Zenith radio, so you can hear the news reports on. And yeah, there's definitely a lot of padding in there.
And the out of focus shots are fantastic. And I love the newspaper article that says it says like woman's legs cut off, ! And it's the headline. Like, it's the weirdest fucking headline.
Are you telling me that they don't write that in your neck of the woods? Man with head removed on the front page.
I think it just says legs cut off.
Yeah, it does say legs cut off. It sure does.
That's great.
If you read the headline underneath it, like right above the fold, it says something about a beer sipping horse.
I'm sure they don't match. Yeah. You just stick that part on there. And
I know I already mentioned Terrifier once, but Damien Leone has to be a fan of this movie. Because as far as I was concerned with the first one, I have not seen the second one, but I know what everybody's criticism of the second one is. This movie has no plot. We've essentially already established that.
Right.
Terrifier 1 has no plot. I think everybody who's seen it would agree. However, Terrifier 2, apparently, which is 2.5 hours long, is replete with all sorts of mythology and backstory and narrative and all the things I guess everybody really wanted from the first one. And then apparently in the commentary on the disc for the movie, there's even more mythology given by the director. I know, but that's why this reminded me so much of Terrifier, the first one, because that movie doesn't have a plot either. It's just for the gore of it and the practical effects. And this movie is the same thing. Like, again, and I'm not saying people aren't doing Terrifier, but people haven't done what Terrifier was doing the way that they did it in a while. That nobody had done this is the important thing with this movie. And yeah, this movie is not great, but again, I think we've already established it doesn't have to be. And Terrifier is not great either, but it didn't have to be either. It literally made enough of an impact with what it was doing that it got people excited enough to go out to see the second one, and it made however much money it made. And Herschel Gordon Lewis does the exact same thing from here on out with his own movies, ramping up the gore, ramping it up, giving people more of what they want, which is more gore.
Right.
Shocks. I don't want mythology in my Herschel Gordon Lewis movies. I don't want them in movies.
They
But
tried even in this movie. They're like, look at Ramses back in the day. It's like, who cares?
Yeah.
Or Ishtar, who's not even Egyptian.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's just so simple. Here's an exotic caterer who is killing people.
right.
Yeah.
But I love and I'm sure you guys saw this. Like the reason that they even put the Egyptian shit in there was at the hotel where they were all staying. There was an 8-foot tall Sphinx outside, and he thought this would be cool, and so they just inserted a bunch of Egyptian lore, I guess you would call it, Egyptian crap, quote unquote, but into I was going to say the script, but they don't really have one, so is inserted it into their way of thinking.
It's built in production.
That's right.
Yeah. Hey, look.
Yeah. I love
People say, was that actually shot in Egypt?
Oh,
Look at that Sphinx during the closing shot. It must have been shot in Cairo.
on location with Herschel
Oh my
Gordon
God.
Lewis. Yeah. In 1960s Egypt. Yeah, right.
Right. Absolutely.
Jesus.
But I do like the juxtaposition, at the end where you go from the gore and then you have the picture of the Sphinx with no nose. And I always wondered if that was an on purpose thing, because it's like, haha, he has no nose either. And I don't know, but it'd be about as good a joke as anything else that's in the movie. About as well thought out,
And so that's the other thing I was wondering with the movie. And, Herschel Gordon Lewis says, like, why did the people at Variety take this so seriously? I was wondering that, again, from a more modern perspective, less the 1960s perspective, how much of this feels tongue-in-cheek to you guys? Like, how much?
Oh, a lot.
Right?
Because
I don't understand how anyone took this shit seriously at all.
So according to Mal Arnold, who was the Egyptian guy, Fuad, that's
looks very
made to look old, but actually looks like he's 25, which is ridiculous. According to him, Herschel purposely was getting everyone else to act campy, but told him to act straight, which his performance is pretty terrible also. So in a different way, but so that makes you think that, Herschel knew exactly what he was going for. I have no idea if that's true, but because there wasn't really much culty things in 1963, right? Like maybe he's inventing cult
If you want to see the true, I mean, yes, I agree with Andrew. There's tongue-in-cheek, definitely. The true tongue-in-cheek version of this is one of its ripoffs, The Undertaker and Its Pals, which is also set in the food service industry. And it was 1966. I think it wasn't directed by Ted V. Michaels or Michaels, whatever, but
he did the Corpse Grinders, though, right?
Yeah, he did produced it or presented it or something. But it has the women all have names that go with food. So one woman's name is like Mary Lamb, and so they kill her, and the next day's menu says leg of lamb. So it's like that's the true pun, elbow in your rib sort of version of Blood Feast. Like makes it really.
And just to throw this in there, I wanted to do a book on Ted V. Michaels right after this. And I got a hold of him, and when we talked, he was like, I don't want we can't use the terms cult because I'm offended by that. We can't use cult or, trash, which I wasn't going to say trash in his book by him, but I mean, maybe it's kind of trash, but but he was just so reverent about his films, which was exact opposite of Herschel. Herschel told a story, he's gone now, but Herschel told a story about, he hadn't heard anything about these movies in a long, long time. And I don't know what year this is. I'm guessing it's like in the 80s. He gets a telephone call and somebody says, is this Herschel Gordon Lewis? And he says, yes. And they say, are you the one that directed? And I can't remember which movie it was. Maybe he named off a couple. And he says, yes. And they said they wanted to fly him somewhere, he and his wife, and they were going to screen his movies. And he told his wife, this is a big joke on us. They're going to make fun of us, but it's a free trip. Again, this goes along with Herschel's cheapness, because he's like, we get a free trip out of this. And they go, and much to his shock, everyone loves his stuff, and they're very excited. And he never expected, I think, or planned it or really wanted it, but figured he could make some money on it later on. It's kind of a neat little story.
Well, and Andy, your book about Tommy Wiseau, I'm sure, talks at length about him trying to retroactively claim, oh, I made the movie this way. This was my intention all along. Which this is when Herschel Gordon Lewis was, that strikes me that same shit where it's like,
right.
I don't know, does it matter? But don't try to put one over on everybody that you knew what you were doing. Because this movie would have been significantly different if it had been campy.
Well, and we're talking about a time when you screened a movie and it was gone, right? And these weren't going to screen on TV ever. So there was no VHS. There's none of this. So, as far as he knows, these are going to screen one time, maybe somebody go see it a couple of times, but then they're gone. So there's no reason really to think about legacy here. He's not thinking about what people are going to figure out down the road or look at or analyze. Why would he have possibly thought anybody's going to analyze this movie?
Right.
He's thinking, I'm going to get in, I'm going to make a quick buck. I guarantee you that's it, because literally every conversation we had about anything was about money. Here's an example. Like, I asked him to write an introduction for that horror book, the one that Rod brought up earlier. We had done a book on the 101 scariest movies, and it has an introduction by Herschel. And I asked Herschel, if I paid you $200, which, whatever, if I gave you $200, would you write this introduction? And he sends back the introduction and wants the $200 that day. And it's like, well, Herschel, I'm poor. I work a 9-to-5 job, man. I'm going to have to get you this $200 like in a couple of weeks. And he wasn't super excited about that, but he was ready to get that money, man.
He's old school like that.
He was old school. Man. Even the day when I pitched in the book, I wanted to do a book. I was going to do a book on him to start with. And he says, and how much of this money am I going to get? Which there's no money in that. There's no big market for that book. And I said, well, it can be your book. We can split it 50-50, which 50-50 of, nothing is not very substantial, but he did manage to get the publisher to pay him some money, though, well before it had sold anything. So that's Herschel.
God damn.
I was interviewing him about his time in Oklahoma City, working and starting his career here in TV and radio. And he shot a couple of movies in Oklahoma. But I asked him if he was going to come out of retirement and do another one. And he was like, if I'll do anything. If someone's ready to pay me, I'll be there tomorrow. So he was all about, I don't think he cared. If you've seen some of the stuff he's put his name to, like late in his career, like he presented a horror anthology that I can't even remember the name of it, but it was really, really terrible.
He'd probably not even watched it, but
yeah, exactly. I'm sure, he filmed a little thing at the beginning and lit his name to it. And I'm sure just for the paycheck, not that it was huge, but it was not nothing.
Well, he was really excited about, having sold the rights to Blood Feast 2. And I don't think, which he did not direct for the people that are listening that don't know, but there was a guy that wanted to make a sequel to Blood Feast 2. It's 40 years later down the road or something. And Herschel's like, give me my money. He was very excited. He advertised the movie somewhat. He was even giving away copies of our book on Indiegogo or one of those sites. I can't remember, to help raise the money. But he got his money first, best believe, because that's what he was. And then good for him. I can't fault him for that. But he even had a quote that he had said something about, I pity anyone who sees film as an art form rather than a way to make money. And I'm paraphrasing that, but it's pretty close.
So I haven't seen Blood Feast 2. I thought he did direct it, but I just wasn't interested in it. The idea, why, I don't know. It's like, can't go to that well twice, especially after.
And maybe he did direct it. I can't remember, but I know he was excited to get paid.
Yeah, it's just not the same. And there is one of his late movies, one of his last ones he did that I kind of find a lot of fun to watch, even though, again, all its faults, and it has many, called The Uh-Oh Show. And it's like a game show type thing where people get killed. And that I enjoyed more because he's like returning to gore. He's not returning to the story, there's not enough story in Blood Feast 1 to continue in Blood Feast 2. So I'm not interested in that. I have seen the remake of The Wizard of Gore and thought, well, this is worthless. It's just, you just can't, lightning can't.
Same thing with 2000 Maniacs got remade and it wasn't great either, but it lacks, whatever. I'm not saying that his movies are good by any stretch, but they have a spark of something. They're their own thing, and you can't, in the same way that you can't just create a cult movie on purpose, you can't create your own Herschel Gordon Lewis movie. I mean, after the fact, try to recreate that.
I mean, again, no. Tommy Wiseau is an apt comparison. Look how many times he tried to redo the room. I mean, everything else. I mean, that's the thing. It feels like a lot of these directors are chasing that first high, right? Like they're chasing the drag. And then they also want to be, retroactively be like, well, I knew what I was doing, so I'm really smart, and it's a cult film. It's like that has never been how this worked. And maybe it only worked that way in a couple cases. But even the things that, are looked at as like the shining hill of cult movies like a Rocky Horror Picture Show. That was a thing before it was even a movie. So that, I mean, in a lot of ways, that's a bad example. This is a good example of a cult movie, 100%. This is a movie that, like, literally in 2024, why would anyone watch this movie? Because it's a movie that's worth talking about and watching because of where it puts itself in a chronological timeline of things that will come much later that would not exist without something like this, at least not the way that we see it now. I mean, I'm sure somebody would have gotten a wild hair up their ass at some point in the 60s. Rod, you've already mentioned similar things. I'm sure we could go around the table and talk about other things that were coming out at the same time, but this is that first one, and that's, you can't get around that. Nothing can get around.
Rod mentioned Joe Bob Briggs earlier, and there was a quote by Joe Bob Briggs, and I can't remember what it's from, but where he made fun of it sort of, and he said, tongue in cheek, Herschel Gordon Lewis decided to make a horror movie, so he opened up the freezer and started pulling out meats and throwing them on the floor, and, for his gore, and it's kind of funny. I mean, it's just, here's a tongue, here's a heart of an animal, pull it out of a woman. I don't know. I just always thought that was kind of funny. I think I cut Rod off again. I'm getting really good at that.
Even though I'm not interested in seeing a sequel to Blood Feast, like, he was lucky to make several other movies that are also still true cult films, but he also has just a ton of pure shit that is not watchable.
And he didn't even know what movies he had.
Yeah.
Like there are probably movies that are still missing because like he couldn't verify or not verify, I think we ended up coming up with something like 38 movies he had directed or co-directed, and 35 he had absolutely directed. But he couldn't say for sure there weren't 2 or 3 more out there.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's how inconsequential they were to him. He didn't even write them down or keep track of them.
Right.
It was about making the money off each one.
Go to one town, go to the next town, go to the next town.
And then when it plays out, start over.
They would do it until the print broke or whatever, until it was unsalvageable, and make another.
One thing I love about this movie that we didn't talk about is that it's my favorite part of the movie. Absolutely. Is there's a part, I think it's the cops, where they say all of these murders are the same, but they're not. Every one of them dies in some completely different, funky way. One of them gets their eye popped out or cut out. And then there's a leg cut off over here. There's a heart pulled out over here. And they're like, all of them murders. And they're not one's in a bathtub, one's on the beach. Then one person, for no reason at all that is discernible, he tries to kidnap her. It's just willy-nilly. But I just love that line, which is probably ad-libbed. All of the murders are obviously the same.
I think in the beginning, there's something like already 7 have happened or something. So 7 in 2 weeks, I think it was 7 killings in 2 weeks. So that guy's like every other day. He's Fuad is on the ball. But yeah, there's they're all mutilated in one way or another. I guess that's what the cops meant. But
the Playboy model also, like, he had told me she could never remember a single line of dialogue. He didn't want her on the movie. That was Friedman's thing. We could probably make some guesses as to why Friedman put her in the movie, and I think she got like $175 total to be in the movie, which I'm sure Herschel didn't even want to spend that. But she can't remember any lines. And when you watch her, you can tell she's reading the cue card, especially the part where she's talking to her mom about having the party. And she's like, I can't remember the line, but it's something like the murders just ruin everything, and you can see her eyes going back and forth. It's great.
At a time like this, I think is the line. Like, yeah, it's like, at a time like this, God, she's the best looking one in the movie, but I mean,
not the best acting though. No. And it's bad when you're the worst actor in this movie. And I think she is, but she's the best to look at.
I'll say, I don't think she's really any worse than the others. She does get, I know. But in every interview I think I've read where they talk about this movie, man, it's almost like they go out of their way to bash her. That I think they obviously had a personality conflict, something.
I think she was a diva. Like, she thought because his thing was because she was in Playboy, she thought she was a big star. And supposedly she tore up her hotel room. And I have no idea, like, what she's, doing rock star party, kicking out the TV. I mean, that sounds unbelievable a little bit, but
I just don't. I don't think it's deserved as much as they smash her when you look at everyone else's performance. They're anti-performances almost. Right. And I think she's just as bad as the others. I wouldn't say she's the worst, but I'm going to
compare them to the median line of badness.
Yeah.
They're all pretty close.
Yeah. I mean, she can hold her arms up for a long time.
That's true.
And she looks pretty good laying by the pool. She looks really good laying by the pool. And, that's why she got cast. Which
That's the business of show business, right? Like that's the business part of the business.
there's no business like show business.
There is no business.
And there's no business like a hoe business. So
Yeah,
maybe that's, but anyway,
different movie.
I digress.
Well, but what's funny is you mentioned the kind of the old school way that they were conducting themselves. I mean, that's the thing about this movie is it's clear that that's the case. I mean, all of this just smacks of, obviously the gore is atypical of the time, but everything else just feels like a poorly made movie from the 60s. If you remove the gore from the movie, nobody would be watching this movie. Literally, people would be laughing this movie. I mean, without the gore, there's very little that this movie does right, unfortunately, which I think is obviously such a saving grace for the movie and obviously Herschel Gordon Lewis's career, because it's not like he doesn't deviate away from what he's doing here with the gore for the rest of his career. He's always kind of still playing in this similar exploitative, subversive sandbox. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I mean, again, it's funny how many legs you care, how long of legs you can get out of something like this. No pun intended. Cooked legs in the oven.
I was curious, and Andy, you might know this. Did this play in any hardtop theaters or was it only drive-ins?
I'm not sure. I think it probably did, but because it kind of went around, like you said, from town to town. I think most of its life was lived in. I do know though that wherever it played it, the first few times, it was a double feature with a nudie cutie sex comedy they had made called Boing, which is so it would have been a weird double feature, probably equally acted in both, but.
I love that title, by the way. What a great title.
Exclamation point, not just boy.
So is that in reference to breasts or a wiener?
Maybe it's the breast made the wiener go boy.
That's what I was wondering.
That's what I thought. But.
White shoot.
Right. Yeah, right. Exactly.
So we were talking about the actress, the Playboy model, why she might have, and I was just thinking about it. It's not anything I've ever given any thought about before, but if Herschel doesn't like her and the others don't like her and she's supposedly a diva, my guess is that she held up the production somewhat and time is money kind of thing. Because when it comes to money, again, money is king in Herschel's world, or was. And, if it costs money, because he obviously was not a big fan of hers. Right. And there were no double takes. I mean, no, they didn't do second takes, he said, except for when there was things that were absolutely awful. And looking at what's in the movie, it bears the question, what were those things? Like, what were those takes that were so bad? It seems like you'd almost put the goofs and the flubs in, that's all right. Just put it on in.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah. Like I kind of mentioned how much of this you guys think is tongue in cheek, because if it had been me making this, I would have leaned heavier into that. But again, that's not the intention here. The intention here is the gore is the focus. It's how many times can we put this up on screen with the budget that we have without, without really having to go out of our way to create a plot? Like you mentioned, you have a woman being kidnapped and then she's just being whipped, which seems like just another reason to have, again, for no reason, seemingly no reason. And then we find her, face down on a bloody table 5 minutes later. And it's like, oh, okay, this existed solely to have this continuous shot of just all the way panning down her body from head to toe, which takes like a minute just to show every single gory detail. Like, if that's what this was about, okay, got it. And that's going into the movie the third time I watched it, I was like, okay, I just have to watch this solely as what is the gore being used for? Because again, that is all this is about. Like it reminded me of Deranged if Deranged had less value in its plot. Like it's just trying to be subversive, but Deranged has a performance at the center of it that is a lot more interesting. I mean, it comes 11 years after this, obviously, but I would say in terms of the gore and the sickening stuff shown on screen, that was atypical of that time too, in a way that this one is for the time it came out. But a performance at the center of it that's memorable goes a long way. And Mal Arnold's not bad, but I mean, he's bad, but in a way that the movie is also equally.
He was working on stage at the time he got this role. And he says his agent called him. All of this is weird because you think here's a guy off Broadway working who has an agent, and here he is with these darkened, weird eyebrows and the white shit in his hair to look like an old man, and he doesn't look old at all, and he's doing those weird eyes. Yeah. It's funny, he only uses the hypnotizing eyes once, but they keep doing it. They zoom in on his big eyes. And the first time it's, he's kidnapped. Yeah. I mean, he's hypnotizing the woman. Well, what the hell's the point of it the other times? Just to remind us he's the same creepy guy we saw in the other scene.
I guess.
The eyes are expressive, so.
They're very expressive.
Yeah, he's always popping them out. Yeah. So, Chris, are you telling me you weren't riveted by the whole book club scene where the guy lectures for like 5 minutes? I think that's where they do a flashback to Ishtar and all that. But that to me was, this time especially, was just a patience tester, not to hit fast forward. But I didn't. But man,
that's 5 minutes.
You deserve an award for that.
Yeah. It's 5.
Since you'd already seen it twice and you knew what was happening, at that point you got to fast forward.
It's so much just like an exposition dump in the worst way. It's like, I don't care about any of this. Like this doesn't add to my enjoyment of the movie. All it does is, again, it just feels kind of like it's forced into this movie. Like somebody just forces
it's
it.
It's like the Terrifier 2 thing, where all of a sudden you got forced exposition. Nobody wants that in this movie.
Yeah. Well, and then
cut that shit right out.
Well, you're looking for the wrong kind of movie if that's what you're here for. Like you're not really aware of what the expectations are.
I was here to see the new Truffaut, but I actually accidentally walked into Blood Feast.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what,
it's funny you say that, because Art House, like, as independent as this is, I love how bright and colorful it is. Right? Because if it weren't, I don't think I would enjoy it, because it looks like a sitcom almost.
The colors still pop.
Yeah, that's part of the appeal. If it looked dirty and grungy and grimy, it would feel more nihilistic, maybe, and just leave a bad taste in my mouth, versus this is kind of fun. I feel like the intent would have actually, I don't know intent, but the vibe would have been completely different, I think. And I don't know that it would have legacy with today.
I absolutely agree. And I think it's about getting that blood in bright red.
Yeah.
Well, and to your point of thinking about something like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I don't go back and watch that movie very often because of the way it's just how gross and grimy it makes me feel. But I would put this on before I would put Texas Chainsaw on again, just based on, again, how over-exaggerated it's again produced. I mean, the production design behind this movie, they knew what they were doing. The colors and the juxtaposition of the blood is... the gore is what you're here for, but they don't slack on the production design. Even that scene, I mean, it's so bizarre. The guy giving the lecture about the Egyptian stuff in front of this, like, I don't know, like a fucking wall. I don't know what it, like, they went down to the local hardware store, like a Walmart, got 1,000 yards of cloth and just hung it up behind him. I don't know. It's so bizarre, but at the same time, it kind of works with how bizarre everything else is in this movie.
Again, though, that's just the kind of shit where I think, were they running short on running time? Because, again, obviously those cop scenes were shot somewhere else. The majority of them were in that office. And I really have to think that some of that, and he never said that, and I'm probably wrong, but it feels like they were shot completely separately at a different time and stuck in there, and which would explain, we need 2 more or 5 more minutes. Let's put a scene in here where he explains how he knew, where he'd learned about Egyptian, remember, quote unquote, Egyptian crap. We'll bring that one back. That's right. We're having a throwback there, callback.
The thing with the Egyptian blood feast, again, it's so ambiguous as to what it is. I appreciate that there's not, like, they don't spend a lot of time getting into the particulars of it, which is, I mean, good and bad for the movie, as long as they're not over-explaining everything. When they over-explain things, the movie slows down.
Yes.
But thankfully, they don't get caught up in explaining it. But at the same time, my issue with the end of the movie is, like, it really just wraps up out of nowhere. I was not expecting our villain to get in the back of a garbage truck and just die. It's shocking in the stupidest way possible. It was shocking.
Oh, it is. It's terrible. And everything else is gory. Why don't we see him get smashed? We might as well just throw a dummy in there and fill it up with blood and watch it get smashed. I mean, that would be kind of fitting with the rest of the movie, but you just see that hand and some gore, some blood.
Yeah, that could have been the very last thing. Like, we got to end this. We're out of money.
How do we end it? Well, there you go.
Yeah, it's got to be. One thing I didn't realize until this watch is that the production company is named, ironically, Manson International. Mm-hmm. That was, I thought certainly that's got to be some kind of retroactive joke, but it wasn't. Like, that was from the 50s. And it just adds to the movie for me. Like, frame one, you're kind of in that weird headspace of what's acceptable and pushing the boundaries of taste. And
independent horror filmmaking, especially independent filmmaking at that time, was so fascinating in that, and jumping around just a hair here, but I'm pretty sure, and I can't remember that Herschel made some movies like this, but I know other people did. There were theater chains that would pay people, they would finance movies that would only show in their chain. And so they were producing their own movies. Then they didn't have to pay any fees to screen the movies. Because I remember Last House on the Left was one of them that was made like that. And it starts out as a titty movie somewhat, and then it ends up being what it is. And I just find all of that, fascinating. These theater chains going, let's finance a movie and know nothing about what it's going to be. Here's some money, Herschel Gordon Lewis. Bring us Blood Feast.
that's how it's supposed to be a porn.
Yeah, it was going to have porn in it. And I just wrote about this in the new book I'm working on. But and there was a scene where one of them was supposed to one of the women chewed another woman's breast off, and then she said she wouldn't do it. So apparently there was a bunch of cannibalistic stuff that got cut out, and that movie had like several lives of that's a different one, different episode. Have us back for that.
Yeah,
but,
I've never seen that movie either. Shocking.
Like you talk that, like that goes back to my grimy thing. Like I had
it feels dirty
until 15, 20 years ago. And I just felt like I needed a shower.
Yes.
And by then, like I've seen everything, it's like nothing can really shock me. But that movie was like, ugh, like I just feel gross.
That's the way I feel when I watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's the same thing. When she falls down in the room of bones, I'm like, fuck this. This is nasty. That is a really, Texas Chainsaw, I think, is really well made, and it is kind of a downer. It does, like, I didn't revisit it for a long time because of that, but it's Disney compared to Last House on the Left, I think.
It almost feels like a snuff film, and
very much.
Yeah,
it's so just intentionally, like I don't know, rotten.
You know what's funny about that? Real quick, I just learned this when I was working on that book, but it was just a chapter in it. It wasn't the whole book on that. But one thing I found interesting was that I can't think of the actress's name that's in that, but she actually thought that the cast members were trying to kill her. Did you see this? So they're all living together in the same house, and they treat her like shit through the whole shoot. And they're pushing her around, and David Hess is scaring her all the time. And apparently Wes Craven knows this and kind of thinks it's funny. So they use it to their advantage. They just scare the shit out of this poor lady every time they're filming. And Wes Anderson, that'd be weird. Wes Craven laughs in an interview later on about how he thought she was in a snuff film, and they thought it was hilarious. Like, that's not. I mean, it's pretty shitty, but it's effective. She looks terrified.
Yeah.
Yep. And it's weird. You think, how the hell would this even happen? Anyway.
If only we're able to use something like that for this.
Right. He'd be like, that's a cheap way to do it. Just
actually kill somebody.
Exactly. Right.
You don't have to make the effects if they're dead.
That's right. And you don't have to pay them.
Exactly.
We'll pay you at the end of the shoot.
Yeah. So you guys kind of opened the topic, so I want to go a little further down it. Outside of Blood Feast, are there any other splatter movies that y'all would suggest if people are looking to check out some splatter films beyond this one, ones that might resonate with y'all more than Blood Feast? Given you guys were adamant you wanted to be on this episode, both of y'all, so I knew you had a lot to say about it, but there's got to be some other splatter films that jump out at y'all, I've got to assume.
For Herschel Gordon Lewis, 2000 Maniacs, I think is, like Andrew said, it's probably his best. The Gruesome Twosome is a lot of fun. None of these are quote unquote good, but The Wizard of Gore, the Gore Girls, I guess, too. Like, he made a number that really
Color Me Blood Red.
Blood Red, of course, that's
which is the Bucket of Blood. Which one came first, that or Bucket of Blood? I think Bucket of Blood, right? Because it's a ripoff basically of the Corman movie.
Have to be, but I'll check.
Right. Not that it really matters, but
because it was 1965. Bucket of Blood was 59. So yeah,
there you go.
But yeah, other splatter movies. Oh man, that's like a huge. I mean, if you want to go in the route of like bizarre and how much of this was intended, I would say Pieces from was that 1980 or so. That is pretty fucking crazy movie and has some dialogue in it. That
the early 80s was a good time for those, like that was the height of these constantly showing up on the, at the video store, these slasher movies, and most of them were awful. But, when I was a kid, you couldn't have told me these were terrible. I've written them every weekend, like based on these covers that looked creepy,
I'm trying to think of some others.
I mentioned
I always would
Terrifier.
think slasher versus splatter, and they're not
Yeah.
always the same.
They're not always the same. But Pieces is a good. It's a good
Pieces
one.
is definitely a fun one. Man, I cannot think of any top.
Well, it's probably because you're not a fan of Rob Zombie movies. I think his movies would count, at least Devil's Rejects, probably.
It's the only one I like is Devil's Rejects because I like that gritty. You went to my gritty. It's got that 70s gritty. I feel like it's the only one that succeeds in that or really succeeds at anything.
It's fair.
Yeah, I like that, and I like the House of a Thousand Corpses.
But what's weird is they feel completely different. Like they don't. And then all three of those movies in that series, because the third one's god awful. But
Yes.
is there just three? Yeah.
Yes, thank God.
And they all feel completely different. I guess maybe it's his mindset at the time. I don't know, but
I've got another one that was like an independent. It's from the 70s. I Drink Your Blood. That's like satanic hippies. It has some gore in it, and it's fun. It holds up. I mean, again, it's not a great film, but it's at least tries more than Lewis ever did.
right.
Can a splatter film be a good film?
I don't see why not.
I'm
I mean,
just
Driller
curious.
Killer kind of tried. I mean, it tried to be an artsy movie and be splatter, even though, I mean, I don't really like Driller Killer, but
Dawn
So-
of the Dead would kind of count. That the George Romero original that is quite pretty gory, or at least what I remember. The
And it's a
first
real
one I
movie.
saw. Yeah, it's a real movie, and it's good.
We've mentioned it already once this month, but I think for me, like the peak of these movies is Brain Dead. Peter Jackson's.
that's a
Brain
good
Dead.
one. Oh, I like
I
Brain
think
Dead a
that's
lot.
that's like the top of this for me. Like that would be the one. We're not covering it this month because I like that movie too much to cover it. Like I will fawn over it for an hour and a half.
You know what's a splatter movie that I really like that people don't, I feel like I don't talk about enough and is one that makes you feel gross and dirty? Maniac, like the Lustig movie that comes out in like 80. And I mean, it's so just scummy and awesomely perfect.
Yeah, okay. So that's one I never wanted to see again, but that kind of gets into the Lucio Fulci territory. Like
Right,
those
it
are
does.
splat. Yeah, and some of those I think are a lot of fun, and then some of them like New York Ripper, it's like
Yeah.
little too. I keep saying,
Argento was going to work on they were going to make a movie together, Lustig, and I'm trying to think of the producer's name, Andy Garoni, I think that's his name, and Argento, and then the movie they end up making after Argento falls away is Maniac. It would have been interesting to see Argento involved directly in Maniac, but I don't know how differently it would have turned out. Maybe he ended up with like this killer score to go with it, but maybe some bright colors, right?
yeah, that's a good one. That's a perfect example right there.
I've never seen Maniac.
I love Maniac. The remake sucks, but
I've heard the remake's okay. I mean,
it just feels like a whole other movie, man. I mean,
I like
at what
it.
point is it a remake, and at what point is it a name only?
Yeah, I don't think it's a true remake. It's its own thing.
And I like
And-
Elijah Wood.
Have you seen what's the actor's name that's in Maniac? The little greasy guy. He's in.
Oh,
He
yeah.
passed away. He's in
Joe-
The Godfather.
Joe
He's in
Spinell.
Taxi Driver. Yeah, Joe Spinell. That guy's amazing, and he played a very specific kind of character. And almost he shows up in all these great movies at the end of the 70s. And he was great. He had a very specific look and vibe. He was kind of creepy. And Elijah Wood and him are not the fucking same thing.
The Joe Spinell movie I've seen more than once on purpose is The Last Horror Movie. I think it's what it's called. Caroline Munro.
I don't think I've ever actually watched that.
Yeah, it's fun. Part of it is shot like at the Cannes Film Festival, with no
Check
permit,
that out.
stuff like that.
Right.
It has a bizarre ending that comes out of nowhere and isn't in tune with the rest of the movie, which is one reason to watch it. But yeah, that's another.
It kind of fits in with what we're talking about in that way.
Definitely. But I trying to remember how much splatter there is in it. I know there's some, but I can't say for sure how much.
Right.
Disappointed nobody brings up Cannibal Holocaust. He doesn't love Cannibal Holocaust.
Right.
Yeah.
And we were talking about the Italian movies and we just moved right on past it.
Well,
Mhm.
I
Probably
mean,
a reason.
yeah, Cannibal Holocaust is one of those movies. I mean, we covered it 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago at this point now. Like, it's one of those movies where I enjoyed it in college for what it was, which was something you could put on and be like, hey, you ever seen this movie? Like, but now it's just like it feels so passé. Like, it's just so quaint. And then the killing of an actual animal, as I know everybody gets really upset about, which I understand. You know, it's part of the perversive, fucked up nature of the movie that they did that. Like, that was part of being exploitative, was to show people something they literally were not going to see ever.
Well, and like you, I saw it when I was, at that age, and you're like, whoa, you're kind of shocked by this, and you want to be shocked, and you want to share it with other people. I'm like, this is real. These are real cannibals, and at the age when, like, oh God, what was that? Faces of Death, which half of it's supposedly not real or whatever. I don't know. But when I saw it, I was in high school, and I was like, we were like horrified kind of by this on the down low. We wouldn't say it, but it was crazy, creepy shit to see a woman get hit by a train or whatever. All this crazy shit is.
A monkey having the surgery done on its brain.
Oh, yeah.
But that was fake. That was fake. For sure, that was fake.
But there were like 3 or 4 volumes of that.
Yeah.
My favorite, I interviewed John Russo and a million years ago, and I asked, he was saying that, I said, so do you think that there's anything that shouldn't be, like, that is off the table to make in a movie? And he said, no. And I said, do you feel like there's a place for something like, say, Faces of Death? And John Russo says, yeah, there's a place for it. Right up the producer's ass who made that. And I always thought that was kind of a good quote, I didn't do it justice, but I didn't. What are you going to do? I didn't have the curmudgeonliness to it that John Russo might have had.
Bringing up Cannibal Holocaust, that also took advantage of the advertising angle, like Lewis obviously knew how to do, which, banned in X number of countries. And I think a lot of the attention that film got was not always intentional, because I believe that director had to go to court to prove they didn't really kill the people in it. Unless I'm thinking of a different cannibal movie.
You're thinking of that's Cannibal Holocaust.
Yeah. Like he hid them, had them hide for, like, not go in public or whatever for like a year or something, and he had to drag them into court to prove that it was not a true snuff film. Yeah.
And, it's the Barbra Streisand effect, right? Like, if you're, you're trying to hide something, and I mean, that's the thing. Like, I mean, that's what David Friedman understood about advertising with this movie, is make it look like they don't want to see it, which is the best way for people to get excited about seeing something, is if you tell them they can't see it. So, and look, it worked. This movie, we're still talking about it in 2024. I think about the infamous William Friedkin, Nicholas Winding Refn interview, where Nicholas Winding Refn mentions, in the same breath as Citizen Kane in 2001, he mentions Only God Forgives and Drive as masterpieces. And Friedkin goes, get this man a doctor because he's fucking insane.
Right.
It's hard to tell what's going to be important within a couple years of it coming out. It takes time for us as a society, and especially as content creators and people that make things, to have things take hold and be important. And we're still talking about Blood Feast in 2024. It just got re-released on Arrow.
People seem to have this need to want to immediately label things masterpieces, like 5 minutes after they saw it for the first time. Masterpiece. It seems like there's this knee-jerk reaction to call brand new things masterpiece. And you're right. You don't know until you can objectively stand back and look at something with time.
Right.
What is a masterpiece, or what is Blood Feast. But I mean, it's a cult movie, but it's not a masterpiece.
Speaking of not masterpiece, I'm guessing because I haven't seen it, but it was remade a few years ago. That's just called Blood Feast.
I saw that. Yeah. I haven't seen the movie, but I see that it's a thing that exists.
Yeah, an actual true remake. I'm sure it's terrible, but I guess if you haven't seen it.
This is your jumping off point. How good could it be?
That's the thing. I don't understand why anyone would want to remake this movie. Like, that you're missing the point so hard of what this is. If you want to remake it,
it's like, do you have an actual script? Then you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, exactly. There was no story the first time around, guys. Come on.
In a weird way, it's IP. Just like everything is driven by IP at the studios these days.
Right.
Some circles like ours, Blood Feast has,
a little bit of cachet. Yeah.
It's a brand. Just not much to be made from that brand anymore.
Right.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, Arrow re-released these movies in the Herschel Gordon Lewis Feast in 2017 on Blu-ray. Mm-hmm. And people bought it. They're still selling it. Like, it's, again, like, yes, most people don't know about Blood Feast, but I would contend most people don't need to. Because the people that it's for are for people that are, I mean, at this point in its history, it is purely a historical piece that is watched to appreciate it for the historical context within which it exists. And I don't think normal film goers are going out of their way to watch a movie like this because in a lot of ways, it doesn't have any inherent value. As a subjective piece, the gore is great and all that stuff, but objectively, theoretically, to most people, it would have no value.
So you're not going to walk out of the theater from seeing Oppenheimer and then immediately throw a Blood Feast on as a double header there? I don't know.
Haven't watched Oppenheimer for plenty of reasons. One of them being I'm not a huge Chris Nolan guy, so I'd rather watch Blood Feast again than watch Oppenheimer.
Oh, shit.
At all.
I saw them the same week, so I
did. You really? So you kind of did do the.
Trying to think if there was anything in between. I don't know. Well, we never talked about the snake on the beach. That was another cool free production value thing that was just sort of thrown in there. We kind of talked about the kissing cup on the beach. That was kind of just a bizarre murder that doesn't.
Overacting of the movie is right there with that guy.
But Friedman apparently had always wanted to have a snake in a movie. So they put it in there for no reason. They spent $50 of their budget to buy the snake, and it got loose on the beach. And one of the actors had previously worked for Ringling Brothers, and he trapped it in a box.
That surprises me. They actually paid for it. And they also, it looks like they paid for a book binding or the book cover for the ancient weird religious rites textbook.
Right.
The best fake name for a book ever.
Well, if you went to book club like the characters did, you might think differently.
Right.
Or you might not have even needed the book, see? Because you could have just had another flashback. She was there also. You had the same thing like Rashomon from two angles.
Exactly.
Ancient Weird Religious Rites is a hell of a book title. You know exactly what you're getting yourself into.
They could have named the movie that. That would have been quite catchy.
The last thing I wanted to point out that we never covered, well, we did talk about the score briefly, him doing the score, but it is the simple score. It is like 2 drum beats as slowly paced in between as you could possibly get without forgetting that there was a drum beat before. Like, that's the score. And
then you have that crappy organ music where it's just like, it sounds like Carnival of Souls, where you just, because he didn't know how to play any instruments properly, but he didn't want to spend the money. Same thing. It works.
Totally. I did get. Now, I probably will see this again at the next how many years I have left in my life. I probably will watch it again. I do enjoy it. It's as like you said, as historical curio. It exists for that, but I do think it's just like the right people will find it. That's what I was going to say. Yeah, it ties back to when Andrew was talking about the person calling up Herschel in the 80s and saying, "Are you the guy that made this movie?" Like, the right people will find it. And those, not everyone is going to enjoy it, but some people will.
Yeah, and you're one of them.
I am one.
That's awesome. Yeah.
What about you, Andy?
I admire the movie in the way that, like, it got made. I don't mean that as a joke. I mean, anytime a movie gets made, it's a big deal. We all make fun of them or whatever, but it takes a lot of effort, even in a movie that only has one take things in it, And here we are, like you said, talking about it many years later. I always am fascinated with the making of stories, how these movies, especially no budget movies by people that aren't technically versed real filmmakers, somebody that has an advertising day job and just goes and shoots a gore movie on the weekend. That's fascinating, I think. And I think, so this is no different than any of those. I like it. Unlike Rod, I will not watch it again, I'm sure. Even this time, I just looked up clips because I thought, well, I've sat through it before. I didn't need to do that to myself multiple times, but
one might even say you wrote the book on it.
That's right. I did. But what's funny? I have not seen every movie in the book, which is that's terrible. But I was young and I thought, I just need to get Herschel to tell me the stories of these. That's all I did. Why sit through every one of those if you didn't have to?
I too love the making of stories. And, this is discussed in the Herschel Gordon Lewis documentary that Something Weird put out called The Godfather of Gore, which that's your book's title too, right? Or don't you have...
Yeah, there is a book called The Godfather of Gore, and then mine is The Godfather of Gore Speaks, because it's technically by Herschel.
Right. But I would love an entire documentary just on this movie. I know it's not going to happen.
I would too.
Guys are gone, but I do love what there is in that film. That entire documentary is a blast. Even if you never have seen those movies or intend to see them, you may not need to. Like, even if you don't ever want to see a Lewis movie, I think a lot of people would get a lot out of that documentary just for that reason alone, just to see what the fuss is all about, with none of the boring parts.
Can I throw a funny aside in here real quick about a documentary? So somebody got a hold of me when that documentary Skin came out, about the history of nudity in film. And I had not seen it. And somebody got a hold of me. Oh my God, you should check this out. The cover of your book is in it. So I'm like, okay. So I go and I watch it. And this is the thankless job that authors have, is that, so I put the whole book together. I got Herschel. I led the thing. I did the thing. But they cut out my name. They cut out my name in the documentary. And so just a picture of the book raised above without my name in it. And I was like, you motherfuckers. So it was almost a really amazing moment for me, but then not. That's how most of the good moments in my life have been, is almost amazing, but pretty good.
Yeah, your placement, the name placement on that cover is just ideal to crop out.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. They felt that way too.
Yeah. I brought this up earlier before we rolled. I'll just tell the story real quick. I did talk about how I interviewed him about his Oklahoma City origin story, I guess. He worked at a station called WKY, which is still around these days. But my grandfather was in advertising, and they briefly intersected at this place, WKY. They briefly worked together, and I'd asked Herschel about him. He did remember the name. I remember my grandfather saying when he was still around, and he died in like 92. So it was before I even saw Blood Feast. But I remember him saying he worked with a guy who went on to Hollywood. Wasn't Hollywood, it's more like Florida, but who had made some indie films that some gross horror films or something like that. I wish that I then had thought to ask more about it, but I hadn't seen those movies at that time whenever I was a kid, and wouldn't be allowed to anyway. But so that's my brief personal connection you hinted at. Never met him, but he was a nice guy.
Very cool.
Seems like an old school dude. And look, again, I think you both kind of mentioned it. I'll reiterate it. There's a lot that can be taken away from this movie that essentially has very little to do with the film itself. That has more to do with just how important it is in the grand scheme of things in terms of the horror genre writ large, but also just, again, exploitation film and the use of gore in exploitation films. So I enjoyed this movie for what it is. I think similarly to you, Andrew, it's not something I'm going to necessarily go out of my way to watch again, but there's a weirdness to the movie that I appreciate, and its ownness to the movie that, again, cannot be taken away from it. And those are things that are not easy to come by, especially in this day and age where, directors are standing on stage at the Academy Awards begging people to make smaller movies and stop wasting hundreds of millions of dollars on other things. So, there's something to be said for that. And especially having a career from 59 to 2016, that's literally nothing to sneeze at. So,
right.
Yeah. So on that note, we'll take a break, play some ads, and we'll wrap this episode up.
Hi, I'm Susan.
And I'm Sharon. And we're the hosts of 80s TV Ladies.
Check us out wherever you find your favorite podcasts.
And please like and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at 80s TV Ladies.
You can find interviews and exclusive behind-the-scenes content on all of your favorite 80s TV Ladies.
80s TV Ladies is the place to go. Please join us.
80s TV Ladies.
Hi, this is HP from Noise Junkies.
And this is Father Malone from Dark Destinations.
Please join us as we examine one of the greatest sitcoms in television history, Taxi, on Night Mr. Walters, a Taxi podcast.
Good night, Mr. Walters.
Good evening, and welcome to Night Gallery.
Thank you, Rod. And I want to welcome everyone to Midnight Viewing, where once a month we talk all about your follow-up to The Twilight Zone, Rod Serling's Night Gallery.
They say it's Rod Serling's Night Gallery, and it isn't really Rod Serling's Night Gallery, it's somebody else's.
Oh, we know. We talk about it a lot. Your curators at Midnight Viewing are the Projection Booth's Mike White.
What can happen to human beings when trust is wiped out by suspicion?
And CultureCast's Chris Stashew.
Small boy encased in a crystal ball.
And I'm Father Malone.
The kind of thing that usually infests nightmares.
Join us monthly at midnight viewing the Night Gallery podcast at weirdingwaymedia.com.
Doesn't remotely belong to me. I have no proprietary interest in that at all.
Is everyone all right?
Signal's got a mind of its own.
Say pit stop.
Pit stop. Pit stop.
Stay back! No!
Fucking kill you!
Hurry up!
He's just taking his time.
We move. We're dead.
So that's right. On the next Culture Cast, we're going to be talking about Ryuhei Kitamura's Downrange. I accidentally picked 2 Ryuhei Kitamura films this month. Oops. The other one was Versus. So until then, Andrew, where can people find you and the things that you work on?
You can find me in Kansas, and hopefully don't, because I like being by myself. But hey, you can find my books wherever books are sold. Amazon's always a good place to look. Walmart.com, whatever. Look me up, read it. If you like them, give me a great review on there. If you don't, you don't have to review it. It's okay.
What about you, Rod?
I'll vouch for those books. I own several of them, and they're great.
I appreciate you.
You bet. And I'll expect my check today.
Okay, Herschel.
He's old school, y'all.
Old school, Herschel.
I am, as always, at flickattack.com. Last time I was here, Chris, we talked about, I have an article on the Zodiac Killer, the 70s movie, in a book called David Fincher's Zodiac, Cinema and Misrepresentation, or something like that. It is now available in paperback. At the time, it was like $100 hardcover, and now
Sure
like,
was.
Yeah, right. That's out now, and also the Herschel Gordon Lewis interview I talked about is in my book, Flick Attack Movie Arsenal Book 1, which came out in almost 2 years ago, and can be at Amazon. Can be found at Amazon for under $20. It's like 500 plus pages, 1,500 reviews, and an actual blurb from Herschel Gordon Lewis that he didn't charge me for.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
I didn't know. I'm surprised he didn't ask for money, but yeah, he gave me a blurb, which is great. I treasure that.
It's because you didn't know. That's why he didn't ask you.
Hey, real quick, can I didn't even think about it. Can I hawk my book real quick?
Go for it.
So, hey, we did talk about my Room book earlier. We did mention it, but I've got a book out on the making of The Room. It is called Accidental Genius, An Oral History of the Room. What I always tell people is if you thought the disaster artist told the whole story, there's more. It's in the words of everybody that worked on the film, and not just Greg Sestero, although Greg's book is fantastic. The movie is fantastic in different ways, but buy my book. If you like The Room, if you don't like The Room, you'll still get something out of the book. Get the book.
I got no books to hawk, but you can find everything that I work on at weirdingwaymedia.com, which is named after something that's in a book, Frank Herbert's Dune. But yeah, that's where you can find everything that I work on, including this show, previous episodes of this show, the thing that Andy and I did with Mike White, where we read through the Spielberg Lucas tapes, can all be found at weirdingwaymedia.com. As for this show, like, rate, and review wherever you get it. Patreon.com/CultureCast is where you can go to get in on the Patreon exclusive collaboration between Mike White and myself, Rankin on Bond, where we spend every month with our friend Richard Haddam talking about James Bond movies. $10 or more gets you in on that. If that's something you're interested in, go now and check it out. Andy, Rod, thank you both so much for joining me. This has been a lot of fun.
Hey, thank you both.
Thank you. I will see you at an Egyptian feast.
Yum.
And we'll catch you all in the next episode.